I want to welcome you guys into our first sports show. This is the Lootpress. What name did we decide to go with?
Lootpress Sports Lowdown.
Lootpress Sports Lowdown. This is our first episode. I'm Lootpress Sports Editor Tyler Jackson. This is Lootpress Sports Writer Rusty Udy, and we're excited to get this thing off the ground. We talked about doing a show for a while, and we finally got around to it. We're going to kick it off with this season and starting with football and run it all the way through to winter and then spring sports and kind of go from there. So first up on the agenda, we're going to talk about football season and kind of go through there. For those of you that haven't checked it out, our 2024 season preview just dropped yesterday. You can find that on lootpress.com. That has 21 preview stories from all area teams throughout the region. So make sure to go check that out. I want to start and kind of run through some of the things, starting with football season. We have some changes this year. The addition of a fourth class, state championships now in Charleston, and we're going to talk about kind of the breakdown of that. And the first thing I want to start off with is state championships in Charleston. I think since 1994 they've been in Wheeling. It's been about 30 years now, and they're back in Charleston. Honestly, I've always liked to change. I've gone up to Wheeling every year to do All-State, and it's about a 4.5 hour drive. And talking to some of the area teams, they have the same sentiment about it. Right. And we haven't had a ton that have gone up there, but the Bluefields of the world and Greenbrier West and Independence, some of the teams, James Monroe, that have found success and gone up there, they seem to be very relieved by it. So, did you watch any of the championship games when they were in Charleston?
Yeah, actually, the last game I went to in Charleston was the Greenbrier West Spencer game, and that was a state championship game. I'm pretty sure that was '92. Yeah, that was the last time. I've been to Wheeling one time for the All-State meeting, but I'm just kind of in that group where, and this is jokingly, affectionately, I tell them, Wheeling's not even part of the state sometimes, because it's so far away. I can, be in Charlotte before I can be in Wheeling.
Exactly,
so,
yeah.
It's a lot easier now for us on this end, especially since we have multiple teams usually, and, it's just easier to get down to Charleston. And actually you can drive and watch it and come home, where Wheeling pretty much demands a stay to watch games.
Yeah, you're right. Every time I go up there, I end up cutting through, I think, Parkersburg, and then spending a good hour and a half in Ohio.
And or you go through Pennsylvania the other way. So.
Yeah, exactly. And it was to the point where my hotel is actually in Ohio every time I go and stay there. And I think there were points brought up about you lose some of the local commerce to Ohio, where it's right there on the border. With Charleston, they keep it in. I like it being more of a centralized location. I know if you're in Martinsburg, it probably doesn't make much of a difference. You're still going 3-4 hours to get to where you need to go. But for everyone in the state, if you want to go watch a football game, it's a little bit more accessible. Like, say you're somewhere like Bluefield or Independence, or say Fairmont. Fairmont probably doesn't make much of a difference for them, or Bridgeport, because I think either way you go. But Huntington, they probably enjoy it being over in Charleston.
Oh, yeah. So real close.
Yeah, that's one thing I like it. And we talked about there's a fourth class that's been added, and it's shaking things up. You can find the full rundown of who ended up where, and we'll go over it when we get to our section about the previews. But it's really split things up a little bit, especially with some local teams that have ended up reclassifying because of a decision from the board of review in the last couple of weeks. So it kind of threw a little bit of a curveball here.
Yeah, I've been constantly having to recheck because, some 4A are actually 3A in another sport, and, so that's a little bit confusing. But yeah, it's a little strange, and especially the last minute change. I specifically did not even fool with the changes until the last school year was over, because I didn't want to deal with that confusion. So then I was pretty much set with the way it was going to be, and then all of a sudden, oh wait a minute, we're going to change it, and then we're going to change it again. So yeah, it's a little confusing right now, and some of the things don't make a whole lot of sense, which you'll have that in reclassification and stuff, but it's going to be a little confusing going forward.
Yeah, and this will kind of segue us into the previews, but with the reclassifications we had in the last couple of weeks, every team in Quad A, the biggest classification in the state, now gets to make the playoffs. You're guaranteed that extra game. You're guaranteed to be playing, and I think it's probably a good point to start here with Beckley, because you did the preview on them, and they're automatically guaranteed a home game, not a home game, but a playoff game now. So let's go ahead and start with them. I know when you did the preview, you were kind of impressed by some of the things they have coming back. Speaking about offensive line, I think they had 4 of the 5 starters there.
Right.
One thing that stands out to me, though, losing Devin Richardson, quarterback transferred over to Oak Hill, and we'll get to that in a bit. I liked the way he played last year. I thought he was a pretty good quarterback, threw the ball really well. They've lost some good receivers there as well. I think Elijah Waller was there last year, Elijah Redfern.
Exactly.
A lot of good skill players are gone. So what was kind of the impression that you got talking to Coach Streak Surratt?
He was really confident with this group, and he really emphasized the line. The line was big. He feels like Keandre Good could be one of the best linemen in the state before this is said and done. They're really strong up there. They're solid in the backfield, which they got a lot of kids coming back. I really don't know if they would have thrown it a lot this year, even if Devin was there. That's just a personal opinion. Mm-hmm. They do have some good players on the outside, but they do seem to want to keep it in the box a little bit and play a little tighter and don't throw it down the field as much as they do at Oak Hill. So I think that's they're just going to kind of power on you just a little bit. They're really strong defensively because they're bringing back majority of those kids. I'm pretty sure it was 9 starters they brought back defensively. So. In the early season and the preseason, they've looked good. Now granted, we're talking, scrimmages and things like that, but they have looked solid. I think Gage Price will do a really good job at quarterback. I think he'll do the kind of work they want. Definitely has a strong arm. Seen him play catcher in baseball, so he has a very strong arm. And he really dedicated himself all through the summer, to the quarterback position. He played it in JV last year, but he really dedicated it to the quarterback position this year. And he's got Brent Osborne to help him. So I think Beckley's going to be okay. I think the only question with them will be is can they get enough wins to get into a home game. Because wins are going to be at a premium now with, basically I think one quad A school on the schedule right now. They had a perfect schedule till about 4 of those schools dropped to AAA. So, when you're talking four schools, I mean, even if you win 3 of those, we're talking about 9-10 points, and that's big when it gets down to home games as opposed to on the road. So, I think they're going to be good. I think this may be the best season they've had in quite a while, but they do need to stay healthy in the right places.
Yeah, you mentioned about the schedule and the points, and this is going to come up quite a bit with some of the other teams we're going to talk about.
Right.
But it stands out to me too. I think they have Bluefield on there, and that's always been a rivalry game. That's been a rivalry game for 40 years. I remember. I think it was 2018 we were talking about it. I'm like, I wonder if they'll get to play that game where it's all rainy and muddy. And I think you had told me, you said they'd play it in the parking lot if they had to. That's how much that game.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ties both ways, to those schools, Beckley and Bluefield, and a lot of those coaches have been around and played in all those. So yeah, it's a huge game for the community. There's a lot of people show up.
And one thing that really stands out to me with that is Bluefield being AA school now.
Yeah.
And looking at Bluefield's schedule, I think that they only have one or two games against the team in their classification.
Right.
I think it's Jameson Road, Independence right now. No, Pikeview too, it's at 3.
Right.
But I'm not sure this is going to be a 7-3 year for Bluefield. I think it might be more of a 6-4 sort of year, just because of how strong the schedule is. So if you're Beckley, you're probably not getting a lot of bonus points from a game like that. And I do think that's going to be something where they're going to need to capitalize and kind of play a little bit mistake-free. Yep. You got a chance to watch your scrimmage against Winfield, right?
I watched the Winfield scrimmage, and they looked really effective that night. Played well. They gave up Winfield hit one play for a pretty good distance that actually led to a touchdown, but they won that scrimmage. And the word I've gotten is they played really well against Cabell Midland, which I thought was more the barometer. And I think Winfield's going to be really good. They were really good last year, but I thought how they're going to do against Cabell Midland, which has been kind of not a really pretty sight the last few times they've played them. And actually, when I'm being told they won the scrimmage, so that's positive. And I could see. I talked to a couple of the kids at the volleyball matches this weekend, and you could see the positive look in their face when you ask them about that game. And so they're believing. And if they can get some wins early and get on a roll, I think they're going to be really good. Last year was just ended really sour for them. They lost a bunch of games at the end of the year. I think some of these guys think maybe some of the other kids quit on them a little bit, and they're really sour about that, and they really want to come back and show that they really have a good football team. Gotcha.
Now that is the only Quad A team in the area, which makes things a little bit interesting.
Yeah.
In AAA, we have Princeton, Shady Spring, and Oak Hill, and Greenbrier East. Let's not forget Greenbrier East. Oak Hill was the late addition. They dropped from Quad A down to AAA. They were one of the schools that led the appeals process. They were one of the original 11 that ended up getting reclassified, and then a couple more dropped down with them after that decision. I kind of want to start off with Shady Spring here because I just mentioned the schedule thing. When I was looking at Shady Spring's schedule and doing the preview story for them, I think that they're going to have to end up playing perfect ball. I think they'll have to be an 8-2, 9-1 team, and
Exactly.
it's kind of, there are two reasons for that. First off, I think AAA is probably the deepest classification of all of them. You have a lot of those upper echelon AA teams that are in that class, Winfield, Fairmont Senior, Spring Valley, that drop down, Bridgeport, Princeton. It's just going to be a bloodbath to even try to get a home playoff game there. So in Shady Spring, where those reclassifications happened, I think they had 3 teams that ended up dropping.
Right.
So you have Pikeview that dropped from AAA to AA. Then you have Nicholas County that dropped from AAA to AA,
Right.
and that hurts them a lot of points. The only game that they have on their schedule with a school in their class is Greenbrier East.
Right.
And I think that's sort of tough. And they also got hammered by Summers County dropping from AA to single A.
Right.
I get the sense that Vince Colacerto really likes that team he has. The offensive line, the veteran offensive line, they kind of took their lumps 2 years ago.
Right.
They had to lean on them the second half of last year, especially after quarterback Brady Green got hurt.
Yep.
But I think they're going to have to play perfect ball with the way their schedule is, and I saw some of the coaches irritated with the decisions that came down, and I understand that after looking at what happened. Yeah, it's really cost them.
Because they really, all these schools, set their, you try to do a couple of things. I mean, you don't want to try to travel, gobs of miles week after week. So, you have to try to get some local games, and sometimes that is a sacrifice in class. But then you do schedule at least enough 5 or 6 teams to get in class to get the points you need. And then if the majority of those teams drop, it's just like the carpet's pulled right out from under you. And it just was at the last minute. It was like they had no choice and no chance to fix it. So, that's the only thing I just didn't think that was right. I mean, they should have kept the points the same as what the class they were in before it reclassified. But again, those are decisions made way above my head. So, I just think it did teams unfairly. And like we talked, some teams have really been hurt by it. Just when you're playing a team that's AA and they're already dropping down, they drop all the way down to single A. That just kills you. I mean, there's just not enough points there, and no bonus points and things like that. So it's a shocker.
Yeah, and moving on from Shady, I kind of want to hit on Greenbrier East a little bit because to me they're a bit interesting. I know they were a bit younger, but they started the quarterback last year as a sophomore, and they threw the ball quite a bit. And Ian Hamrick, right?
Yep,
Yeah, Brody Hamrick, yeah. And tight end's Grant Burdette, correct?
Right.
Yeah, so and they kind of had to go through the fire, and
Right.
there was a challenging schedule there. They played some good teams. A reloading year, not on top of losing a couple kids they did the year before. Ian Klein, an all-state running back, transferred to Charlotte to a prep school. So Cupboard was kind of bare. They took their lumps, but it seems, kind of reading over what you wrote, that they seem pretty excited about going into this year.
I think there's a very quiet confidence, in Fairleigh right now. It's exactly what you just said. It's kind of funny talking to Coach Lee. He talks about the wide-eyed Friday night look. About how kids are just kind of thrown into the fire, and he kind of chuckled. It's like some of them really kind of took their lumps a little bit. But now they're a year stronger, more confident, so you're not going in there with a shock. And I think they feel like they've kind of have the upper hand a little bit now. It's kind of like going to a new school. You're kind of lost for a little while. You don't know where to go, what you're doing. But then you can kind of get to, okay, I know I belong here and I'm okay. And I think that's where they're at. And, Brody Hamrick's a big-time quarterback. I mean, he's a prototypical quarterback, almost looks like a Peyton Manning type quarterback. Big arm. He's got Grant Burdette, who's Virginia Tech is high on right now. Plus they have other receivers that, when you've got a tight end that demands coverage, that just helps the wideouts even more. And I think they're going to be really good. They've got Settle back at running back. They have a couple other kids that's come in, one from Allegheny, I believe, and one from, I can't remember where the other one's from, but they believe
Covington.
Covington. They believe they're really strong at running back, and they're not going to have to just have one running back take the heat. So, they're quietly confident along the line. Yeah, I think that Greenbrier Ace is going to be fine this year, and they might be the team that you don't want to get a hold of right now.
Yeah, and I think that they're one of the teams that benefited from the reclassification
Right.
and dropping to this new AAA. Because you look at enrollment numbers and just kind of being out there, I don't think that they belong in the same category as Huntington or Cabell Midland or Morgantown or Martinsburg or Parkersburg.
Yeah.
It's just a different world. You go to the cities, it's a little bit
My
different.
understanding is this is the first time they've dropped under 1,000 kids, in enrollment. And, every coach I talk to, it's the same thing, it's a gradual decline, with not much economy there and things like that. It's just a gradual decline of students. So, you're right. I mean, when you're trying to compete with a school that's double your size, basically, with students, they just can't do it.
Mm-hmm. The other two AAA schools, Oak Hill and Princeton. I want to get into Oak Hill first. Really electrified that program last year when Devon Marion took it over. He was able to kind of get them through. Now the schedule, and I talked about it last year, was a little bit easier, but they went through it, and I thought they were pretty competitive. They played some really good teams. I think they played Princeton in the regular season. That was a 2-score game, and it was back and forth really up until the fourth quarter. So they seem pretty positive, and they have a Turner at running back. We talked about Richardson earlier, who's in a quarterback battle with Levi Kiska.
Right.
But there seems to be a lot of excitement there, and they got new turf coming too.
I was going to say, it's everything's going in the right direction for them, and, when you talk to Devon, you can just tell, he knows what he's doing, and he's really excited about what's going on over there, and he just likes to throw the football, and, that's the thing he told me is like quarterback position is going to boil down to who can throw the football down the field. They like to throw it. He doesn't make any bones about it, and then when you're trying to stop the dynamic receivers they have, and J.D. Moritz is just going to pound you and pound you and pound you. That's a big old boy right there, and he's athletic and can really run. So, they've got a really good setup on offense. They're going to have to make some adjustments on defense. I think they lost a little bit there, but they've got the players. I mean, Brandon Champion's one of the best linemen in the state. He'd be anchoring the line for them. So, I really, when it dropped down, I was like, wow, Princeton and Oak Hill, I like their chances, at least getting semifinals, if not to the finals this year.
Yeah. And we're going to kind of get into Princeton here now. A team that really is on the rise. Last year, they made it all the way to the island, and they kind of benefit from dropping to the new AAA, which, again, I think that's another school that belongs where they are. Yep. You go to Princeton, it's not the same as Huntington, but they battled through. They ended up that they beat Oak Hill, they beat Parkersburg, they beat Bridgeport, and then they lost to Martinsburg.
I think they're still scoring in that Bridgeport game.
Yeah. I never thought I'd say this, but that game kind of changed my mind. There is such a thing as too much offense. I saw it that night, right after Thanksgiving. They have a lot to be excited about. They lose Dominic Collins, who's probably, for my money, clearly the best receiver that I've ever covered. Right. They lose Eli Campbell, 3-time first-team All-State offensive lineman. He was in the Stoudemire conversation. Yep. So it's hard to lose a Kennedy Award winner and an offensive lineman like that and think that you're going to come back and compete for a title. But we saw that 2 years ago when Independence lost Atticus Goodson, and they came back and they were even better the next year. Yeah. For Princeton, I like their chances. I don't think it's going to be easy because, again, you have Fairmont Senior, which has loaded up in the portal. They've gotten a lot of kids from East Fairmont and North Marion, a team that they beat in the state championship game. Bridgeport's always Bridgeport. It doesn't matter what size they are. Yep. They've probably been the most competitive team when it comes to playing some of these schools like Martinsburg or Cabell Midland in playoffs. It doesn't matter if they have 900 kids or 1,000 kids. They go there, and it's just a brand of football that's hard to stop. Right. And Spring Valley dropping down is interesting. You're right outside of Huntington. You have a lot of kids. They're a team that's also competed very well in the MSAC over the last couple of years and played in a couple of the state championship games like Princeton has. And you kind of go to those next tier teams in AAA, Winfield, et cetera, whatever North Marion may have left over at this point. And it's not an easy route for any of the AAA teams that have title aspirations.
I think quarterfinals are going to be crazy in AAA, and in the semifinals and the finals, but it's going to be a battle of attrition trying to get through that.
The quarterfinals especially, but kind of staying on topic with Princeton, they have a lot of skilled players. They have a lot of what got them to the state championship last year. Brad Mosser, Chance Barker at quarterback, Daniel Jennings, Penn State commit, transferred back over. He's a kid that grew up in the Princeton district. Caleb Kaiser, and Markel Lowe at running back.
Yep.
They're loaded. They're not at a loss for talent or anything like that.
Exactly.
I think the thing's going to be is just kind of keeping their head on straight and not letting last year's success get to their head, because that can happen. And when I talked to head coach Keith Taylor, he said, hey, there's no guarantees. He said it took 100 years to get there. It quite literally like 100 years.
And some of those games were tight games too. It wasn't like they just ran out there and walked all over everybody. They were a really good team. But the schedule, when you look at it, like we've talked, Greenbrier East is better, Oak Hill's good, Beckley's good. It's going to be a tough road for them.
Mm-hmm. And you look at it, Pulaski was a team. I think that was a game that was like 49-40 against Princeton last year. They play Winfield this year. They open on Thursday against Capital, which I just want to take a moment. I applaud all the teams that play Thursday games because I think they got it right. And then I asked Coach Keith Taylor about this. I said, why is it on Thursday? He said, I don't want to lose gate to Bluefield Graham. He said, if we're playing at home on Friday, we're splitting gate, and most people are going to Bluefield Graham. It's probably one of the biggest high school football games in the nation that week. And I thought that was a great idea.
Yeah, that's a good. I never even thought about that line of thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've always said it. The more you can play a Thursday game, get a Thursday game on your schedule, it allows us more time to get over there. We can cover you. So if any teams are out there listening and you're trying to schedule, absolutely try to factor in a couple Thursday night games in there. You're the only show in town. You're probably going to get more people coming over. You might get scouted too more by opposing teams. But
coordinated with your soccer coach.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that Thursday night is. I like that line of thinking. But for Princeton, they have those title aspirations. I think that they had a chance to go watch them scrimmage Graham the other day. I like their skill, talent. I like everything that they bring back. They have really, defensively, it seems like their approach is pretty boom or bust. There was a lot of blitzing, and can understand why. When you have Kaiser, who was a second-team All-Stater on one end, and you have a Penn State commit on the other, and then you're blitzing Markel Lowe, who, again, an All-State running back last year, and our offensive player, or our running back of the year last year. You got to pick your poison, and those two ends are tough enough. So when you have Lowe coming through, it's difficult.
I think that will create some turnovers. Either quick decisions by a quarterback or some sacks, forced fumbles, things like that. And with the kind of caliber that's in AAA, you're going to have to force some turnovers.
Mm-hmm. So that wraps up AAA. Moving on to AA, and this is one that I ended up somehow. Usually we kind of do the same stories year in and year out, and a lot of these schools that kind of fall into AA. So the area AA teams are Bluefield, Independence, James Monroe, Pikeview, Midland Trail, Wyoming East, West Side, Nicholas County, and Liberty. I kind of want to start off with Nicholas County because they're an interesting one. I talked about this ad nauseum last year, but I have a philosophy in football, and it's statistically backed up. 7-point games, one-score games are usually coin flips.
Right.
From year to year, there's a regression. If you win a lot of one-score games one year, you're probably going to regress back to the mean. Like if you're 7-1 in one-score games, you're probably going to be 4-3 or 3-4 or something like that.
Right.
Nicholas County was 0-3. I think they lost their first 3 games by a combined 6 points.
6 points,
and that's a very difficult pill to swallow. And that's the difference between 5-5 and 8-2.
Yeah, and the Shady game was the last play of the game.
Mm-hmm.
The Oak Hill game, they had the lead and lost it late. And Oak Hill, we saw how good they were. So you definitely could tell they were legit. It's just they lost those heartbreakers, put them in a bad spot.
Yeah. So kind of with the kids they have coming back, Colton Helms is kind of the headliner at quarterback. But Gene seems pretty optimistic when you talk to him.
Very optimistic, as optimistic as he'll portray. He's got kind of some of that dry humor, and it's always great to talk to Coach because he's funny. But when you bring that many guys back, and the one thing he emphasized was about that group was the fact that they didn't quit. When you were down like that, they could have just tossed it in and forgot about it. Now, granted, some of that was the senior leaders that graduated. Even though it was a small group, they picked that group up, but they kind of taught this group to win. And that's the key, and I think they're going to carry that right in. Now, they got the big game to start the season with Oak Hill, and I think they get Independence in week 3, which is big. But if they can get, through the first part of the season like we think they will, Yeah, they've got a chance to be something special. You know, I mean, they're going to be able to throw it with Helms. They got plenty of talent around him to run the football. I mean, even though they're replacing their running staff, you know, I think they lost 2 or 3 of the running backs, but they're really good on defense. You know, Nicholas County's going to be tough.
Yeah, and I always like using that week 1 matchup between Oak Hill and Nicholas County as a litmus test because I feel like Nicholas County is just a solid program. I looked at it. I don't think that they've missed the playoffs in back-to-back years since 2009 or something like that. It's been 15 or 16 years. Yeah. So there's a lot of consistency like that, and I value it. And that's why I've really enjoyed the Oak Hill Nicholas County games to start the year because I'm like, okay, like I can understand like which one's going to be good or know, and it's really good litmus test. Yep. Next one I kind of want to talk about is Liberty, and again, you did that one.
Yep.
Well. Let's hold Liberty for a moment I did a lot of AA ones and probably going to get winded here. Let's go ahead and I'm going to start with Pikeview. Pikeview has kind of been in a bit of a blunder. Jason Spears told me last year before the season started that would be his last year. And they hired Larry Cook, who resigned during the offseason. So then they had to hire another coach, and Jack Turner took the job, and I think he was approved at the last day of May or first day of June or so. So he's only had the program for 2 months, and he was quite honest about it that he needs to lay the foundation. This year is going to be a building year. Pikeview, I don't think that they've made the playoffs since 2010.
Wow.
The last time I think they had a over 500 season was 2017, and they didn't make the playoffs that year. I think that was when they had Mitchelson and Rose, and the points just didn't fall for them. Right. AA was really strong that year. Yep. I think that they're going to have a bit of a tougher time this year just because, as he mentioned, he said I'm still trying to teach him how to correctly lift weights, and his background is a strength and conditioning coach in Fairham, so he's trying to get that down. He runs the old style wing tee, which I think benefits them because they started running the ball a lot more last year, and they have the kids that have carries. I think that's something that if they can stick with it, he seems to have a good idea of what he wants to do and how he can do it. And he doesn't want them to get deviated too much. He wants them to kind of stick to one concept, learn it, and then build off of it. It seems to be a really good approach to team building.
Right. When I talked to the coaches that played Pikeview last year, it's easy to look at Pikeview and think, well, the record's bad, so they're not a very good team. And that's not the case. I mean, everybody I talked to, Coach Mustaine at James Monroe and some of the other coaches is like, you don't understand how good Pikeview is. And then when you watch them, you're like, they're really not that bad. And so, being able to run the football like that, they're a team that if you don't take them seriously, they can come up and sting you. Hopefully he can get it going in the right direction. I know there's been a lot of struggle down there, consistency and things like that, but it will take some time. Football's just not, you just can't snap it back into gear. You got too many pieces, too many players you've got to have. And I'm sure their numbers are probably down just a little bit, so it's going to take a little time, but if they get consistency, then they could build something.
Yeah, another team you hit on there, James Monroe. I had the opportunity to talk to Coach Mustaine, and he's kind of like Gene. He's the guy he's the first to talk up his opponents, and they lost a lot. They lost 4 starters on the offensive line. It was a very good offensive line, very experienced. They lost Cooper Ridgway, who was a 3 or 4 year starter for them, played linebacker, played running back. They lost Chaz Boggs, who was probably the ultimate utility kid. He could run. He was a good little scat receiver too.
Yeah.
And
hard-nosed.
Exactly, yeah.
Hard-nosed.
And these were kids that played on both sides of the ball.
Yeah.
James Monroe was single A last year. They're into the new AA, and that's kind of the way it's always been. Yeah. They've mostly been AA in the history of the school, so they're bouncing back and forth. But you're relying on these kids to play on both sides of the ball. Right. He didn't seem very worried. The pillars that they have coming back, obviously, Brady Baker, and you did a good story on him in the summer. And then quarterback Leighton Dowdy, who this will be his 3rd year as a starter. Yep. He started to play some games as a freshman too. I think that those are 2 really good building pieces. Yep. It's just what else are they going to have around those guys skill-wise to kind of help them move the ball up and down the field. And he didn't really seem too perplexed about it. He kind of seemed confident in the kids that he has there.
They have a kid, his name's escaping me right now. He played fullback last year. And they're really high on that kid. I mean, they really think he's going to be a big-time Brock
Parker.
He is going to be a big-time football player for him. And anytime you talk to Coach Mustaine, when Brock Parker comes up, he gets really excited. So, they have kids like that maybe haven't been in the limelight because of other big names there. I think are going to step into the limelight. And, if he's not worried, I'd kind of be scared, or nervous, for the other teams, because you're right, they lost a ton. But even when I talked with Brady earlier in the year, he felt like the line, even though they lost so much, that they were working really hard and that they could be really good. Now, when you guys have guys that played in the North-South game and things like that, yeah, you're going to have to take a step back a little bit. But he still thinks they're going to be pretty solid. So, James Monroe should be pretty good. The James Monroe West game should be another dilly this year, just like it always is.
And that's with noting that they also have a difficult schedule. I mean, you open with Wheeling Central, which I have to kind of note, half of our teams seem to be playing Wheeling Central this year.
3 times they come south this year.
Yeah.
Can you believe that? That's crazy.
We're basically going to be almost another Wheeling Central. We might cover them more than the Wheeling area does at this point, just because they come down here a lot. But, they open with Wheeling Central, and I think they have Shady Spring in week 2, which is another AAA, and we talked about the kids that they have back.
Right.
So they have Bluefield back. They got Bluefield back on the schedule last year and beat them, and that's going to be one of the contenders
Still
in
going to be a
AA.
tough game, yeah, big time. And it's going to be a game Bluefield needs, probably.
Yeah. And then you hit on it, Greenbrier West again. That's, they lose a lot of kids, and we'll get to that in a bit, but the rivalry game, it means a lot to both of the schools.
Never know what's going to happen there.
Yeah. James Monroe's team, I'm going to keep my eye on. I'm kind of curious, and I have some questions on how they'll develop throughout the year.
Exactly.
Up next, I'm going to move on to Bluefield and Independence. I'm going to start off with Bluefield. I had a chance to go over there. Freddie Simon seemed pretty optimistic about the offensive line. I was doing the math on it. I don't think that they have a single kid on their roster that has more than 30 carries in their career, which is a bit different. They lost a lot of skilled players last year. Sincere Fields, R.J. Harrison, who basically catch anything in any sort of coverage. I never thought I'd say this, but skill positions are kind of what I'm most interested to see at Bluefield, because I really don't know what they're getting into. But Freddie says that they don't really have a workhorse type. They'll distribute the ball a little bit more. They have a quarterback battle going on there between the freshman and the junior. They don't really know who they're going to go with yet. They're a team that, and again, we talked about it earlier, schedule. Schedule is very difficult for them.
Very brutal.
Open with Graham, who is a AAA based on the SSAC's formula. Then they have Princeton after that. You have Greenbrier East. So you're starting off with 3 AAAs. You have Independence. He's going to be another contender in AA on there. And you just go throughout the schedule. You got James Monroe. Beckley, yeah. I think one thing that works in their favor is you do get bonus points for losing games now with the way the formula was tweaked, which is something I think really benefits them, because I think it's been as much as 15 years where they've had trouble getting games. I remember they had to travel down to Charlotte in 08 and 09. Yeah. So I think this is beneficial.
The thing with them was, and we've kind of seen it in the preseason, is like, can they score? I mean, that's the thing, as you just talked about. All those dynamic weapons are not there now. So who's going to step in and fill those spots? And you can only play so much good defense. You've got to be able to score the football, and it's not been really good so far in the preseason. But they have one of those teams where each year you think, okay, well, this is a year Bluefield drops just a little bit. No, it never seems to happen. So you kind of feel like they're going to be okay, but it is going to be a process. Yeah,
and I feel like just looking around the AA field, I think that there are probably four or five serious teams. I think Frankfurt, I think Independence, I think Bluefield, I think Scott, and I think Williamstown. Williamstown, when I saw them last year, I kind of came away thinking, and watching the AA title game, Williamstown could have competed and maybe even won a title in AA, as good as what they were last year.
They were real good.
And they've had a good program there. And again, when you get those teams like Frankfurt's also been a playoff mainstay there. They were probably a play away from playing Independence in the AA state title game in 2022.
Exactly,
Have a lot of good players.
It's amazing the athletes they have up there. Baseball's really good. Football's really good. It's amazing what they have up there.
Yeah, absolutely. But that gets to the point I have with Bluefield. They're probably one of the top 3 or 4 teams, but can they get in?
Right. And you kind of feel like with that schedule, they may have to play the road games the whole time, which is even tougher. But if they get in, they're always dangerous.
Yeah. So that's what I'm curious about. Whoever thought we'd be at the point where we're kind of questioning and wondering about Bluefield skill players? It's been a while.
Yeah, that has been a long time.
Moving on, next team, and I mentioned the Independence. That's we were both there at media day. The numbers were a little bit down. I was a little bit surprised by that, but they seem pretty confident with the kids they have, and I think for good reason. Just kind of hitting on what they did last season. It was a little bit rough to start, which when you're replacing 17 starters, it only makes sense. They made a change at quarterback. The schedule eased up at the end of the regular season. They took advantage of it. But you can't discredit what they did because of that, because when they get to the playoffs, they go on the road, they blast Roane County, they beat Winfield in the game, muddy rain conditions, and that's something that that played right into Winfield's hands. That's the type of game that Winfield wants to play. They go there, they beat them, and then they're only down a touchdown late in the third quarter against Fairmont Senior, who ends up winning it. So they really kind of overachieved, I would say. But that was a very valuable experience for the kids that they have coming back. Kind of starts with Alex Blankenship up front. There's Silas Nelson, who split some time at receiver and quarterback, is going to be in the backfield. I think they're going to do a good job of moving him around. And I think that's probably to their benefit at this point, especially with the quarterback situation. They're going to start a freshman, Brock Green, who seen him a little bit in middle school. He was a pretty good player, has all of it. But sometimes there is an initial adjustment when you're a freshman coming in.
Speed especially.
Yeah.
Speed especially.
And defensive side of the ball, they feel pretty confident there. Dylan Ritchie, Landon Riddle, they have most of their linebacker core back. They have some linemen that they feel really, really good about. And it's always started in the trenches for that group. I think especially bumping down to AA, I think that this automatically, kind of vaults them into, you're talking about them playing on Thanksgiving or practicing on Thanksgiving.
I think they have a really good chance to do something special again this year. But, the thing you worry about with the schedule they've got too is that, sometimes it's a war of attrition. And like you said, maybe the numbers aren't quite as big as they have been, in the past. And, then you start to worry about depth a little bit and things like that, because when you play that difficult schedule, then you are going to get some kids hurt and you're going to get some kids banged up and can't go. And you do have a freshman quarterback. Now, granted, I think we both are pretty confident with this kid. I think he's going to be pretty solid, but he is, a freshman, and they've got that little bit of a learning curve. Now, he does have a lot of good voices in his ears to help him, which is a really good thing. But if he can play like we think he's going to play, then Independence is going to be really special this year.
My favorite nugget about Brock Green is his mom played at Summers County, was an all-state center there for girls basketball. And his dad, I believe, actually played on the Herndon team in 92 or 93 that lost in the single-A state championship. Yeah,
wow, okay.
Yeah, there's and obviously his grandfather was the head coach of the Wyoming East team that won it all in 1999. So there's
he does have a little bit of it in his blood.
Got some genes, yeah. He's got some good genes. But you hit on it. The schedule, it's brutal. I mean, they're another one of those teams that was watched the Thursday night decision. So they're going to be playing Herbert Hoover on Thursday night, and that's going to be a game that's broadcasted. And I like that. And that's a tough challenge right out the gate. You're talking about Dane Hatfield. That's a kid, last year I thought that he was going to be in the Kennedy contention, and Hoover's season didn't necessarily go the way that they had hoped.
I think they started rough too, but came back pretty solid.
And then you kind of go down their schedule. They have Princeton still. They have Bluefield. They go up the Brook. They play a West Side team that I think is going to be very much improved. We'll talk about.
I do too,
Yeah. But we'll go ahead and kind of hop into West Side here. To me, that's my sleeper. That's my Oak Hill team. I think it's going to be improved. I look at the schedule. I think it's pretty manageable for them.
No doubt.
I'd be surprised if they finished worse than 7-3.
I was thinking 8 or 9 wins when I looked at the schedule.
Yeah, and all the kids they have coming back. Caden Vance, third year as a starting quarterback, seemed to really click for him. Dual threat type of kid. Rushed for 500 yards through, I think, 23 touchdown passes last year. It really gives them all. They have their skilled players back. Offensively, they feel good about their offensive line. Defense is where they're kind of questioning a little bit. They kind of challenge those kids. And when Justin Koger had mentioned and explained it to me, it made sense. He said last year, we got to 3rd and long on a lot of occasions, but then we gave it up. We'd be able to stop the run. We'd be able to get to those long down distances. We were just never able to capitalize. We give up a touchdown. We give up a long completion. Absolutely. So to me, I really like, especially when you have the quarterback and you have that many skilled players back, they're pretty key to what they've done. I like what they're building. I think that they have a realistic shot of hosting a playoff game to be able to take care of business.
Yeah. That's one of those, I looked at their schedule, and, for about the first 3-4 weeks there, it's one of those that you look at as a sports writer and think, oh man, that box is going to be, that's going to be awful to have to do that box. They're going to score a bunch of points.
Yeah.
They scored a bunch of points last year, and you got to, like you're saying, you got to feel like they're even better this year. And, you talk about an impressive athlete. Caden Vance is an impressive athlete. He's an excellent football player, excellent basketball player, and baseball may be his best sport. That's what's crazy. So, this kid is multi-talented. He is a horse to try to drag down. I just think, I really think Westside's going to win 8 or 9 football games this year. And, they may do, I don't know how deep they can go, because when you start playing the top tier, things get a little different. But, we'll get a really good read on them at Independence, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of mentioned that he does a little bit of everything, plays everywhere. I think his brother played every position on the baseball field when he was a senior year, Brady Vance.
That's right.
I think he played a little bit of everything. So
another talented kid.
So I want to bounce around over to Liberty, because I've talked quite a bit, and you did that. We were talking about this a little bit before we started the show, but you were impressed. You went over to Liberty scrimmage, and you like some of the young kids that they have.
Yeah, I think they're going to be really solid this year. And, I was actually kind of talking with some of the folks down there. It was like, it's a shame that they're not playing Independence this year. Now granted, the last couple of years has been rough for Liberty. And it's not necessarily, Independence was really good, but Liberty was really down. They really had a struggle there with kids. They got hit hard by graduation in 21 when they made the playoffs and went down to Poca. Then they basically lost everything. And so they had kids out there that really had no clue what they were doing. They were playing freshmen, sophomores, and they were taking some lumps. Those kids are grown up now, and now they have a really good freshman class coming in, a big sophomore class. They're much better, and like we were talking, I went out to watch them scrimmage Ripley, and even though Ripley struggled a little bit last year, there's been some changes at Ripley too. They have a lot more kids out now, and Ripley's very fast and got some really athletic kids. I walk out and there's like 60 kids on that field, and I'm like, wow, Liberty, they might get dump trucked right here. This is not going to look good, because there is a difference in class.
Yeah.
Liberty was moving the ball right down the field, no problem, and outside of, Ripley hitting a couple big pass plays on them, which Mark did say, they were just playing some base coverage, trying to check some things, and so he wasn't really overly concerned about it. They were impressive. I was impressed the way they have advanced, and, it's not like Liberty has not had good football teams. There's been playoff runs, they've been decent over the years, and I think this is a really special group. And I think if his son can stay healthy at quarterback, I think they have a chance to do something pretty good. Now, I'm not going to go as far as I think they're going to make the playoffs, but I think they actually, as the season goes along, if they stay healthy, there will be some discussion about that, if they can get in. I think they're that good. And he's a big-time dual-threat kid, a lot like the Vance kid, just in a freshman's body. But he's got a big body for him. When I look at him, he looks more like a junior or senior to me. He's a big kid, and he's fast. He can throw the ball a little bit, and he reads things well. He's very smart. And Coach Workman said that's his biggest asset. He said he just knows the game. He's been the coach's son, so you round the game your whole life. You just know the game. And he was tough, man. I remember one kid, from Ripley, big old kid, grabbed him on when he was running outside. He just took the kid and shoved him off, threw him on the ground, and kept on running. So, I think, him and Brock, I think, are really interesting to me this year. And I think, we talk about storylines and stuff. I think if they can play like we think they're going to play, they're going to take their teams to some special heights.
It's interesting because, and again, this is all dependent on how Bluefield's quarterback battle shakes out, but they also have a freshman quarterback. We could be talking about 3 freshman quarterbacks coming up, throughout the years that we're kind of comparing and doing our thing. So I always like going back to, and you'll appreciate this too, the guard class. I think it was of 2020 when it was Luke LaRose and Tommy Williams and McQuaid Canada and Braden Cruz at basketball, and they were just all really good, and they all graduated that same year. We kind of be looking at that same sort of deal on the football side with this group.
And they're advanced. A lot of times when I'm so old that it was 10 through 12 when I was in high school. It wasn't 9 through 12. So you see these ninth graders, these freshmen coming up, and sometimes you have to remind yourself, well, they're just freshmen. They really probably shouldn't should be playing right here, and they are playing, but these kids don't look like freshmen. They look a step above, and they look advanced. So it's going to be fun to watch them for 4 years.
And that matters too, because we talk about it. There are a lot of kids that are reclassified. There are some that play football now. They're 18, almost 19 years old when you get to that point. So you're not just 14 years old stepping into this. You're playing against some literally grown men.
I heard them talk about that in soccer. I mean, playing against bigger bodies. How hard it is. So imagine in football what it's like.
Two teams we have left in AA: Midland Trail and Wyoming East. I want to start off with Midland Trail. I don't think that I got to see them last year. I saw them the year before. They got into playoffs last year as a 5-5 team, and this was where the new formula change of where you can lose games and still get points paid off for them, because Trail, ever since Frank Isaac's been there, they've always kind of beefed their schedule up. They've played games that have been able to give them points, and I think that really paid off for them last year. They lost some kids. They lost some, Jaden Gladwell was a kid they played at quarterback, and they moved him out. They have some injuries, though. I think they're going to be without Landon Steiner again this year because he got hurt. But Caden Lefew, they'll have Thad Lewis, I think. Not Thad Lewis. Thad Brown. Thad Brown at quarterback. They feel pretty good about what they have there. But again, playing in AA, playing the schedule, I think that they're another one of those teams that has Willing Central on the schedule. So they should... It'll be interesting to follow them throughout this year. I think that they should be a playoff team, but playing in the new AA, it's going to be difficult, especially with some of those teams who fought there at the top.
Yeah, I think they're definitely a team. We saw Summers County get dropped to single A. I really think Trail should be too. I mean, they're similar to all those schools. They really should be playing in single A, but they are going to have to deal with playing in AA. I think the issue with them this year is they have the talent. I just think they're thin. They're just not going to be able to afford many injuries and things like that. He has really 5 really good linemen and across the front. It's really probably, he thinks, like it's the best line since he's been head coach. And going back to the big Great Wall of Hyco, that those big lines earned. Last couple of years they haven't earned those titles. So it's been kind of dormant. And Jeremy feels like this is the group that may be able to bring that moniker back. So, but they're thin, and I think that's the big deal with Midland Trail is like if they were in single A, they might be able to stomach that a little bit easier than they are going to be with the AA and the AA schedule. So, and there's several teams that's like that. Liberty's going to be, thin too. If they can't afford many injuries, in reality in high school football, 1 or 2 key players goes down, it just changes the whole game for everybody. We've seen that over the years,
especially in this area where we have a lot of smaller schools.
Right.
You brought up the offensive line when I covered this game against James Monroe 2 years ago, and I also keep in mind that this was when James Monroe was on his way to Wheeling.
Big time.
He had mentioned that after the game, he said this game wasn't won tonight. This game was won in December, and he was disappointed by how the kids hadn't taken off-season workouts seriously. And he feels coming into this year, it's been totally different. They've kind of set the standard, and I think that's where his optimism for his offensive line comes from.
Yep. If they can stay healthy, they've got 5 good ones. I mean, they really do, and they're. Thinking, if I remember right, it was only like 1 senior, so they got a lot of underclassmen, and so they have a chance to be really, really good. And this would be a good proving ground this year. But it is kind of like the basketball last year. It would have been nice to see Trail in single A. It'd be nice to see Trail in single A in football because I think they really could have something special there, and maybe in AA. You never know, but it is a bigger task.
Last team in AA, Wyoming East. I think their school also is kind of borderlining the single A sort of threshold there. When I did my previous story, I went back and looked it up. I was a little bit surprised by this, but when I thought about it, maybe not as surprised as it made sense, I suppose. They've not had a season with more than 2 wins since 2019 when Larry Thompson was there, and they made the playoffs. And I thought about it, COVID year, you only play 3 or 4 games that year. Just some other years where numbers are sort of sparse. You're playing up. You're playing a lot of really good area teams.
Taking a lot of beatings.
Yeah, you're coinciding with the run of independence there, where they're getting better. Liberty was a playoff team in 2020 and 2021 as well. So you had a lot of really good playoff teams on your schedule. Shady, I think, made the playoffs 2 of those years as well. Summers County, good playoff team last year. Nicholas County, another playoff. So they're playing a lot of playoff teams, and whenever you have a bit of a talent drop off, Coach Stephen Cook, he was honest. He said, if we make the playoffs, it'd be a bit of a Cinderella story this year. But they are happy with the younger core that they have. He mentioned Grayson Ashley as a kid. He got a knee scope, but whenever he comes back, he will be ready to play. They started 3 freshmen on the offensive line last year. They'll be starting again this year. And typically, I feel like it's always that junior year whenever we see the offensive linemen start to click.
Kind of like Liberty.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, precisely. And Shady's another good example.
Yep.
But he had mentioned that. And, right now they're in a quarterback battle too. They feel like Mike and Smith has more arm talent. They have another kid though that they feel like is a bit more mobile. So they're trying to figure it all out. Right. And I think that it's going to be, the way I like to look at coaching hires is by year 3, you kind of know if you're able to implement things. And high school is a little bit different because you're working with the talent that you're given.
Right.
But year 2, and that's where Coach Cook is right now, is more of, okay, like, can we build? Can we get from 2 wins to maybe 4 wins or 5 wins?
Right.
And Westside was the same thing.
Yeah.
They were a 3-win team and a 5-win team, and,
Right.
and now we're talking about them, maybe being a 7 or 8-win team this
Right.
year.
Right.
I think that's kind of where they're at. So as long as they can kind of keep those kids together, I think this is a good year. I would say try to aim and build and mark for next year to try to get to the playoffs.
I think a lot of this too is, we talk about this with coaches and people, that a lot of this starts in the Little League programs.
Mm-hmm.
How good are your Little League programs? I know Nicholas County's had a great program up there for years. I've been out to Woodrow on weekends, and they've just got a gazillion kids playing. We used to call it Midget League football, and now they call it Little League football. I think a lot of that has to do with it too. If you can get those kids playing, through the years, then you have a better chance to keep these things going, and you don't have those gaps. But COVID really took a toll on a lot of schools and a lot of programs. Because it's almost like kids didn't have anything to do, and so they got disinterested, and so it's really kind of put a damper on a few things. And you see Wyoming East moving in the right direction, but it's another school, like you say. I know they're in cross country, they run single A now, so they probably really should be single A. And I guess if it wasn't for the 4-class system, they probably would be in single A. But they probably belong there.
Yeah, they're getting closer. I think that enrollment's right at around 400 or so.
It's crazy.
But I think that if they can get to the playoffs, that's a huge accomplishment for them this year. But like I said, my philosophy in year 2, I'm trying to see as somebody from the outside observing, are you moving in the right direction? Are you gathering more wins and getting more competitive?
Yeah.
And I think that matters more than anything.
Exactly.
That wraps up AA. Now on to single A, which you ended up with most of the single A previews.
I love single A.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and start off with Greenbrier West, because they're the interesting one. They're drawing a lot of media attention from around the state as a team that, hey, you expect them to be competing for a title again.
Right.
I'm a little bit interested in them. I know that their numbers are extremely high. I think it was like 50 or 60 kids.
Right.
Is pretty close.
Right.
They lost. When you lose 17 kids, it is hard to replace, especially in single A football. It's a lot of experience, a lot of really good players.
Right.
I think that Cole Vandal, who they had last year at quarterback, was probably one of the better quarterbacks. He could really sling it. He a big, strong arm. Him and Caden Pack have really been really good quarterbacks for that program.
Right.
Losing a kid like Ethan Holiday, Jake Pate, who I don't think they had for the last 2 games of last year. They lost a lot of really good skill players, and it's tough. And then you look on the defensive side as well, where they've been so dominant. You're trying to get some cohesiveness there too.
Right, and that's the thing is, just what you said. The 17 players that they lost is not only is it a big number, but a good portion of those play both ways.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a lot of buzz there. I think the buzz is kind of cautious on, in Charm Code, because they understand what they're dealing with. They're having to find some places for people that maybe played in certain places. They may, move Isaac Agee out of the safety area back up to linebacker, things like that. When you lose Ethan Holiday, come on. That's big time losing. Yeah. And so they've got some positions that they really have to find some answers at. The thing that I'm taking back with this group is it's totally different. Last year you had the huge personalities, the big players. I mean, Vandal and Holiday. Anytime you were down there, you could tell they were big, boisterous personalities. Not quite that way now. These are more quiet, business-like, blue-collar type kids, which is fine. Mm-hmm. It's just a different atmosphere now, and they've got a lot of answers to try to find. Your quarterback's different. You got different running backs now. I mean, I think AG's going to have a big year, but he's going to have to shoulder the majority of the load now this year. Where last year it was Pate and Vandal and Holiday that did a lot of the running, and he got mixed in. Dunbar's been a little slowed with some injuries. Early in the season, he was a big kid in the receiving game last year. So that's they're going to have to find an answer there if he's not going to be able to play, or if he does. They do have really good defensive players. The C.W. Sturgill is a great middle linebacker. Kind of hangs in the middle. Brandon Ponecker, I don't think quite got the pub that he deserved last year because of all the personalities around him. But that kid, he was second on the team in tackles last year. I mean, he's a beast. So they do have players there. It's just going to be a little different, and they've got some tough games to start with. But they got to go to Pendleton County. If they can win that game and maybe beat Fort Fry. I don't really know. I know of Fort Fry's in Ohio, but that's about all I know about them, so I don't know how good that team is. But if they can get that game, they have a good chance to run the first few and be undefeated going to James Monroe. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm like you. 17 players, that's a lot of kids to replace, and it wasn't just average football players. They were big-time players that played many games for them. So we'll see how they develop through the year. It might be good that schedule's not, brutal at the start outside of, going to Pendleton. They have a good program there.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I feel is worth mentioning, too, with the linebackers is, not saying that the linebacker's job last year was easy, but when you have Cole Vandal and Jacob Witt, and those kids they had on the defensive front, it's a little bit easier to clean things up when there aren't very many holes to run through. I don't really know what the defensive line looks like this year, but it looks like there may be more on the shoulders of those linebackers when you're trying to replace those many kids.
To slow Wahama down to 20 points last year, I mean, I don't know how many people got to watch that game, or that was unbelievable. I'm telling you, that was one of the best single-A offenses I've seen. That Van Meter kid was just unreal. And, they were fortunate to get out of that game with a win because it was just a flip game. I mean, it could have gone either way. And that guy was electric. So
basically one on the Philly special two-point conversion.
Exactly, yeah. So, the fact that, they were able to hold them to 20 shows how good that defense was. And they pitched a ton of shutouts over the last 2 years. I believe it was 14, and like 3 times they've kept teams within 7 points. So, there's a big standard on defense, but I know it might be a little, I'm not sure this team can live up to that. We'll see.
Yeah. We're going to go with the single-A school that I profile, which is Summers County. They were another one. They were double-A up until about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. Yep. They dropped to single-A. And I think that they're probably a top 8 team, based on some of the kids they have back. They lost quarterback Brandon Isaac, but they have back Ryan Oliveros, who's going to take over at quarterback. And to me, that's tough when you have a 1,100-yard receiver, and you have to move the quarterback. That's tough. I want to stress how rare it is to have an 1,100-yard receiver in this area, especially in single-A football.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so you take away that threat a little bit. Damian Foolin, I think he had about 400 yards or so as a receiver last year as a freshman. Yeah. He elected not to come back out. So they're moving pieces around a little bit. They do have Tyson Atkins back, who first team All-Stater, I believe, as a linebacker his freshman year. Right. Has been an All-Stater, just hung around ever since. Good linebacker, good fullback. So he'll probably carry the bulk of their load. But we talked about this, I think, yesterday. Their schedule is brutal. We could talk about them being a top 8 team in single-A, but at the same time, I'm not really sure. It's going to be a task at 4 wins, and that's not a reflection of them. That's a reflection of playing Independence, playing James. The only single-A team on their schedule is Greenbrier West, the defending state runner-up.
It's Greenbrier West.
So you have Independence on your schedule. You have James Monroe on your schedule. It's an uphill climb.
They play Greenbrier East. I mean,
yeah.
Gee, Christmas. I mean,
And Shady Spring.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're talking 2 AAAs right there. If they get in, they'll probably, it may be on the strength of bonus points that they get
Right.
from losses.
Right.
And again, that's not a slight on Summers County.
No.
That's just, if I were to adjust schedule, based on class and things like that, I would say they probably have the most difficult schedule in the area.
Yeah, when I looked at that schedule, I had to look twice. I was like, wow, this is just unbelievable. Look, our AAA schedule, we really did.
Yeah.
And, of course, they were expecting to be AA. And so, that was going to be factored in a little bit more. But, when you drop down to a single A school and then you look at the teams they're playing, I'm like you, I don't know where you find 3 or 4 wins in that schedule, and just because the schedule is so brutal. And I don't know if that's going to be enough to, kind of way it develops if it can get them in. Now, maybe they can find a couple wins and get to 500. I get to 500, I think they're locked in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But that schedule's brutal. But I don't know. That's rough. That's all I'm saying. It's just rough.
Well, my stat of the day, and you could probably guess this just based on what we talked about, they have more AAA teams on their schedule than Shady Spring, an actual AAA school. And that's not a slight on Shady. Obviously,
Right.
we talked about how things change.
Same thing, yeah.
But it is kind of funny, they're now a single A school and they have more AAAs than an actual AAA school, just by the way things shake
I'm
down.
sure they'd
shake
like to
down.
go back and reformulate that schedule for sure. now.
Yeah, absolutely. But provided they can get through it and they can get through it healthy, they show you ready for postseason time.
Yeah, the Summers County Greenbrier West game is week 2, but that might be a huge game. We would think that to be important maybe down game 7 or 8, but it may be an incredibly important game in week 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for the sake of both of them.
Yeah.
So we have 5 teams left: Meadow Ridge, Riverview, Montcalm, Mountain View, and Richwood. I kind of want to start off with the 2 McDowell County teams, Riverview and Mountain View. Riverview feels very optimistic about what they have coming back. They're now in single A. Mountain View under completely new leadership, and for me, I want to start off with Mountain View. I think it's important to note that they've been losing kids to Graham, Virginia, for not just kids, but really good kids. I think Tydres Clements, who was 2A state player of the year in Virginia, was a Mountain View kid.
Right.
That's what I was told. And watching that kid play, he was right up there. He was, he was in that Judah Price sort of talk, just how good he was.
Right.
And I believe that was a Mountain View kid. Yep. So they bring in a new head coach, Will King, and you found some good nuggets on Coach King.
I went down to. I don't often get to go to McDowell County, but the way things have panned out this year, I actually got to go to Mountain View and Riverview and actually got to talk to coaches face to face. Of course, I know Gary pretty good where he was at Richwood and stuff from from Riverwood, I'm sorry. But I'd never met Coach King, and, I really wanted to talk to him face to face as opposed to a phone call, which is, not very personal. But I did not do my research before I went there, and I wish I had now because I really enjoyed talking to him. We talked for nearly 20, 25 minutes, in an interview. So we talked for a long time. And he was a lot like talking to Coach Lee and his philosophies of, getting the program in the right direction and everything. But he was the quarterback on the last Charleston State Championship team, quarterback on the first Capital State Championship team the next year. And then, of course, he played on the 92 Marshall 1AA Championship team. And about halfway through the interview, I had to ask him, I was like, do you even know Coach Lee at Greenbrier East? And you could see him light up, and they do know each other well. So when I talked to Coach Lee the next morning, I was like, I talked to a friend of yours, and he's like, oh my goodness, I tried to recruit that dude to West Virginia Wesleyan. And of course Marshall came calling, so he said it kind of worked out pretty good for him. But
a thing or two about winning.
Yeah, it's just a different philosophy, when you talk to him, and you hit the nail right on the head. It's a lot about consistency and accountability, and that's what he's really kind of emphasizing. They don't have big numbers right now, but they have some kids that are big, some kids that are talented, and we've talked about this over the years for a long time. Mountain View's always had the athletes. There's not been an issue with them having athletes. It's just been the numbers and getting the kids to stay and be committed. And I think he's going to do that. I really do. I think, early in the season they had the unfortunate, task of playing Riverview to start with, so Riverview has probably the experience factor on them. But I'm telling you, you get down into week 4 and 5, Mountain View's going to be a handful. They really are. You know, they've have some tough games with Tug Valley and Sherman, which are going to be both really good single A teams. But I mean, he would not, of course, talk about playoffs right now. He's talking about play to play, week to week, getting better each practice, things like that. But if those kids buy in, which they really seemed to be buying in that day in practice, they really were working and looked really effective. I mean, we could be talking about them maybe backing into the playoffs this year, which would be, to me, would be unbelievable with what they've had to go through with, you know, coaching changes and inconsistency and stuff. That'd be amazing for those kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always said that I think that they genuinely have the same sort of level of athlete that teams like Bluefield and now Independence have had. It's just always been that and eligibility. And being from McDowell County, I know this team. You know, there are a lot of broken homes. It's kind of like a different world.
Yep,
you know,
exactly. They have a lot of factors outside of school and football that they have to deal with. A lot of other places don't, and that's just the facts.
Mm-hmm.
So.
The other team you mentioned there again, Riverview. I believe they were 6-4 last year.
Just barely missed the playoffs.
Yeah, just barely missed out in the playoffs. So what were kind of your impressions from there? He talked about some of his running backs. He mentioned the name I hadn't heard in a while, and Jeremiah Johnston from Richwood. That brought back memories of, because I think Jeremiah's first year was my first year. Yep. You know, Jeremiah, Caleb Jantois, you know, a lot of kids.
We all covered sports. Remember those kids being really good players. So they have a lot of kids back. I mean, I think they lost 4 kids and 3 that played. They have a lot of kids back. They have a lot of linemen back. They have skill players back. Of course, you know, you're replacing Jackson Danielson, you know, who was the quarterback who was really good. But
basically a 4-year starter between there and his time at Wyoming East.
Right, and a very good, multi-talented, dual threat kind of kid. But they just have a lot of good pieces, even on defense. And just when I was down there while they were taking pictures and kind of chatting with the players, goofing around with them, there's a lot of positive vibe there. They really feel good about this, and they have enough seniors to kind of lead this group. They have a really special group of freshmen coming in, and I think there's got about 3 or 4 of those that's probably going to play and contribute because the middle school team was really, really good, and they really have high hopes for that middle school team. So all this kind of flowing together, they're thinking maybe the next 3 or 4 years at Riverview should be pretty positive. And, of course, the school started with a bang in 2010, made the playoffs 3 straight years, but then it's been dry since then. Only had 1 winning season since that point before last year. So they're really high on things. The kids they're big. I mean, I don't know what's in the water down there, but there's some big old boys down there, that's for sure. I was standing beside some of the linemen, and I don't get dwarfed very easy, and, I look like the little kid, in that bunch. So, I think they're going to be pretty solid. They just got to take care of business. He feels like, he kind of used the statement that Gary did is it's either going to be the most historic senior class to go through here or the biggest bust to go through, because he thinks they're that good and they really should be in the playoffs and maybe even get a home game. They think they're that good. I
say this as my first year at Riverview was open my junior senior year, and that's where I went. That to be the most historic senior class,
that's a big statement.
Because my senior year they went up and they won a road game at Ravenswood,
right?
And then basically it came down to the last play at Shady, a team that was undefeated that year in the quarterfinals.
Yeah, that was a good team. That was a real good team. Yep.
Yeah, so that's.
It's a big statement.
Those are pretty lofty standards there.
Exactly.
So moving on, next team I want to hit on is Meadowbridge, and you did a really good story on kind of their evolution, devolution back to the I formation football and running in, and it kind of makes sense. Last year when I went down there to hand out offensive lineman of the week and player of the week after Caden Sims ran for 400 yards or something like that, I was like, man, these are big boys. And Coach Dwayne Reichard mentioned that when he first saw Caden Sims, like, hey, he looks like an offensive lineman, and I agree. He is he would probably be your typical fullback, but he has speed and power. Really good player, and they return a lot of those kids. It seems like number-wise, there's a lot of optimism within the school to get that much of a turnout.
Kind of the word down there is the fact that they had that stretch there where they didn't know if the school was going to stay, and so you have families like, well, I don't want to get my kids, I want to have them stay here when I can put them somewhere else and they can finish and go all the way through. I think that was part of the problem. Now the school is definitely going to be staying. They're doing a lot of renovations. It really looks nice down there. I mean, there's a lot of construction going on. But they have kids moving back in because their families moving back in because they think they're going to be there the whole time. So and a lot of people still have the smaller town philosophy, like the kids in smaller schools and things like that. So, and honestly, Meadowbridge has a lot of tradition in football. They really do. I mean, they've been solid. They've run the Power I for 100,000 years, and that's why we gave Dwayne such a hard time. The year he had to change, a couple of years I think, to the more air raid attack. But he just didn't have the personnel to run like they do now. And when they stack up in that Power I right now. The big boys they got up front, I mean, they are healthy, and they really should have a big year as far as that's concerned. Same thing with them, though. They got to stay healthy. They're a little thin on the front line, kind of like Trail. You've got the top five, and the other two are they're kind of working them in, trying to get them better, but they've got to be healthy in order to do that. And of course, you want Sims to stay healthy. He missed the summer. He rushed for 1,600 yards last year and basically missed the Summers County game. I think he got hurt in the first series or something. He had 60 yards, but he got hurt real early in that game. So that's how effective he is. And it's not a kid. I mean, some of us old hands remember the old Kool-Aid commercials where the Kool-Aid man would come crashing through a wall,
Oh,
Yeah, that's what Caden Sims looks like. I mean, he could come crashing through your wall. So, he's a good kid. They're all good kids. And I really think they've got a good shot at making playoffs this year, unless the ball flips the wrong way on them a couple times. But I think he feels like all 10 games are winnable. And, when you have a schedule like that, then you have a pretty good shot at making playoffs.
It's interesting because one thing I've kind of struggled to project with a little bit here is with the when we expanded the 4 classes. I'm sitting thinking, wow, how do I kind of project? Oh, well, does this team make the playoffs and do they win a game? For Meadow Bridge, in the new single A, they're one that I don't really know how to project. I would say that with the experience returning, they're probably a playoff team, but how far do you go in the playoffs? The single A is the one, and I think this is a lot of the reason why statewide Greenbrier West is getting the attention that they are, because a lot of people just don't know what exactly to make of the smaller single A. There's a lot of coaches. I think John Lilly, the head coach at Independence, mentioned this to me. He was asking me, he said, how many active coaches have won state championships in this class, that class? And we got the single A, and I was sitting there thinking, I was like, I don't know that there have been any. It kind of brought up that point, and it just kind of adds to the thought of, okay, what does new single A look like? That's going to be an interesting playoff to watch.
Yeah, I crossed that same bridge when I was doing the volleyball, because all of those teams that were single A powers have kind of stepped up now to the double A.
It's no longer your Williamstown.
Right, and a lot of these teams were good. They just weren't good enough to get into the upper echelon of single A. So yeah, it's interesting to see how this is going to play out because when you look at Meadowbridge, I mean you see an impressive football team right there, and it looks like old school single A football. They're going to line up and they're going to run it down your throat, which I remember one thing Jeremy told me. Jeremy Moore at Midland Trail, he was an old Fayetteville guy. We talked about the running game and stuff like that, and he's like, yeah, I just would soon run 50 ISOs the whole game. I hate to throw the football.
The old school, when you throw the ball, 3 things can happen and 2 of them are bad.
That's it. So, yeah, they should be good. They should be real good.
So last 2 we have, and I want to go with Richwood first, but we have Richwood and Montcalm. Richwood, situation right there right now, I believe they have an interim head coach because usual head coach is right now, Todd Russell, is on administrative leave.
Right.
Unclear the details of that situation, but I believe that they've lost quite a few kids. I think Cooper Donahue's gone now, right?
Yeah, they lost a ton, and they got a bunch of young kids. Numbers are kind of in the mid-20s, so they're going to be playing a ton of young kids. And it's been a struggle the last couple of years now. When I did talk to assistant coach John Malcolm, he was very positive about the kids that he has. But that's going to be a rough road, to kind of, we got a lot of kids that will be playing for the first time, a lot of inexperience. So, you got those growing pains and things like that. But, you would think that even when you talk to a coach, they would be, I don't know if nervous is the right word, but concerned maybe. But he was really positive about the whole thing. He thinks they're going to be okay. But, it is going to be a tough ride because, man, they lost a bunch of kids from last year.
And even then, those were teams that
Right, they were
you know,
2
they're
and
struggling.
8, I think.
Yeah,
something
2 and
like
8,
that.
3 and
Yeah.
7. So
Right.
it's really hard unless there's
Yeah.
just kind of a total swap in
One
mentality.
of my
with
favorite
kids.
places to go though, because it's really almost like stepping back in time a little bit. You know, you got the lumberjack up on the scoreboard and things like that. So, you know, it's a lot of fun to go down there. You know, so you hope they do well, but it is going to be a grind for them, I think.
Last team, Montcalm. This is actually a team that I got to see last year. They bring back a ton of kids, and most of these kids have started since they were freshmen. They have been 8-2, I believe, the last 2 years. The schedule has kind of bit them. They haven't. You know, we talked about it, they were 8-2, but they lost out a playoff spot to a 5-5 team.
Right.
To me, I would say that they're probably a safe playoff team if they can replicate that sort of success. You mentioned when you talked to Coach Adam Havens that they've had to Buffalo, which is technically a double-A school
Right.
now,
That
so
helps
there's
a little bit.
kind of points there either way. You know, a couple single-A schools had reached out to me. I think Summers County and Greenbrier West, so they had reached out to Montcalm, and you know, there was nothing there.
Right.
But I think that this year, with all the kids that they have coming back, I think this will probably be their year to get in the playoffs. And again, I hate to project wins and all that, but
Right.
this is a very experienced group.
Right. Yeah, they've been together for quite a while, and there is a sense of urgency with this senior group because they kind of understand the situation. You know, it's kind of their time to get it done, and you know, they've had back-to-back 8-2 years, and you know, basically the way Adam explained it to me is like, you know, they schedule to compete, you know, and they understand their situation, and anybody that's been to Montcalm should understand the situation, and they are a very small school, very small numbers, and I mean, let's be real, they've had football since '95, they've had 4 winning seasons, and 2 of them are the last 2 years. So that's what they kind of have dealt with over the years. So, you know, when you're constantly going 1-9, 2-8, then you have the same problem that you talked about with, you know, some of the other schools. You know, kids are like, I don't want to go keep getting beat up, you know, and so you have trouble keeping numbers. So, you know, now they do have a good group that's come through, and, you know, I think they have a really legitimate shot of winning 8 or 9 games again this year. Have to stay healthy, like we've talked before, you know, because they don't have huge numbers either, about 30. But they have some great players. I mean, that quarterback, Jalen Younger, I think he was for 1,600 yards last year. So, you know, he can chuck it a little bit, you know. And
they're multidimensional. It's kind of been that way because I think Younger also started when he was a freshman, but they've been that way for the last 2 years. Like they've run it about as much. They probably run it more than what they've thrown it, but you know, they've balanced things really well, which is something you don't expect. We talked about Meadow Bridge kind of being more of a run team, and Greenbrier West historically being more of a run team too. But Montcalm these last 2 years, I feel like they've done a really good job of balancing the pass and the run. So I think that I think that our 8-2, 9-1 season could be in the cards for them, and they get that elusive playoff berth.
And they have some interesting games. You know, I know I think both of their losses last year, I think, were to Meadowbridge and Riverview, I believe. And so I think they play both of those again this year. They play Meadowbridge up in Meadowbridge. So, you know, that'll be interesting. And both of those games were tight games. You know, it wasn't like they were being blown out. So, you know, they've been effective on defense too. I mean, you know, they've only averaged giving up about 6 points a game. So, you know, they should be pretty solid. And, you know, it's a shame they didn't get in. I mean, I don't know how good they would have done. I mean, if they played Williamstown, let's don't blow it out of proportion. You know, Williamstown, like you were saying, is incredibly good. But, you know, if they could have got with, you know, maybe a 4 or 5 seed and played them, you know, it'd been interesting to watch to see how the kids would have done. But I think they could make it this year, and it would be the first time in school history.
Absolutely. So that wraps up the preview session, and we're getting here towards the end. I want to go over some of the top games of Week 1. We've hit on some of them a little bit already, but Independence at Hoover is a Thursday night kickoff. Wheeling Central at James Monroe, which a 6 p.m. kickoff, which I love to hear that. I wish we'd get a little bit more, 6:30 kickoff and make everything a little bit easier.
That's right.
Capital at Princeton, Oak Hill at Nicholas County, and Bluefield Graham. Those are the 5 that I'm really highlighting. I'm keeping an eye on. Pendleton, Greenbrier West might be another one, but again, that's more so. We'll get into that in a second. But, you know, is there any certain one that kind of stands out to you that, you know, kind of yields the most questions?
I'm like you. I mean, you can tell, usually first game of the season, you kind of feel like, you know, there's still a lot more to develop later in the year. But Nicholas County and Oak Hill have always been kind of that barometer. You know, we can kind of tell if one gets kind of beat up pretty good, okay, it's going to be a bad season. And I think that's going to be a good barometer, you know, to start with. You know, I think Princeton is going to handle Capital without too much trouble. I really don't know what to think about the Independence Hoover game. I really don't. You know, with Hatfield there, you know, I think it's his 12th, 13th year at quarterback.
It's funny because the brothers have all kind of, there's like Drew and then Devin and now there's Dane. And I think Drew was the first one, and they played at Mingo and Logan and Hoover. So I think that there's basically been a Hatfield brother in the state playing football since 2017 or so.
Long time.
So yeah, we're talking about 7 or 8 years.
But it has seemed for a long time.
And Dane started every year of his career. Yeah. So yeah, that adds to it. I think for me it's Independence Hoover, and I have an expectation. I know Hoover's program that I expect to be in the playoffs and to win at least a playoff game every year. I think every year since Joey Fields has been there that they've won. So the first year they came here and they beat Liberty. Okay, so the second year when they were the 1 seed, they lost to that Fairmont senior team that went all the way.
Completely wild game.
Yeah, so that was the only year, but that was a 1 seed though. You know, if you're maybe a 2 seed and you don't get Fairmont senior in the first round, you're probably winning some games.
Right.
And then I think they were an 8 seed the next year, and they ended up going all the way to the state championship, losing to Independence. Last year they get in, they lose to North Marion in the second round. So that's a team that's had some playoff success. It's going to
be a crazy atmosphere too, with it being a statewide game, all that publicity, all the broadcasts and everything. And you know, Hoover is just going to be wall to wall up there. I would assume Independence will probably travel pretty well. Red, white, and blue will be flying everywhere. I mean, it's
Thursday night game,
crazy game.
One of the few in the state. I think, to me that's. Yeah, that's the one I'm looking at. And
it's going to be interesting.
I think a lot of other people kind of have the same questions we do about scaling and how it's all going to work out. So that's the one that stands out to me. You know, Bluefield Graham, I feel like that one's always a rivalry game, so it doesn't matter how good or how bad either of the teams are. It usually tends to be close and ends up being competitive. And I don't feel like there are a lot of conclusions I can draw one way or the other from that game. Oak Hill Nicholas, we hit on that one earlier. Capital Princeton. That should be interesting. I know Capital's down. I don't think that this will be their year. I think afterwards, John Carpenter's back there at head coach.
Back up on the rise. But
yeah,
I think Princeton's got too much for him, way too much this year.
I think so too. And Wheeling Central, James and Rowe, I think that'll answer some questions for me for James and Rowe and how things operate there. Wheeling Central has been down by their standards, which by down.
We joked about this last year. When's the last time a public school beat Wheeling Central twice in a row? That's been crazy.
Because they ended their season and they went up there and they played them and then they beat them up there too. It's
they're going for the trifecta.
Yeah, and when we say Wheeling Central's standard of being down is not playing in the state championship every year, so it's still a good program. But I think it'll answer a lot of questions for us. Well, some questions for us with James and Rowe. It's hard to take away too much from week one. You know, I want to go back to what we were saying about Independence. You know, 3 or 4 weeks into the season last year, it's like getting in the playoffs could be a bit of a struggle. Then you get in and you're all the way in the semifinals.
Yeah, and with Independence, you know, I mean, we talked about Brock before, you know, but you know, if it was just like a normal game, you know, maybe a Liberty game or a Shady game, I mean, even though there's big atmospheres, I don't think he's even come close to seeing what he's going to see up there, and it's going to be pretty intense.
They got the flashing lights and all that, but I do think one thing that aids them is having all the kids back you have on defense. Right. And defenses are usually this time of year ahead of offenses as it is, so I think it should be a good game. That's kind of the one that I have highlighted to get some.
They just can't let Hatfield get loose and run all over the place.
Yeah. And we'll have coverage of quite a few of these games. Thursday night, you'll have Summers County at Pikeview. I'll have Princeton at Capital. And Friday night, you'll be up in Nicholas County for that game. And I will have Bluefield Graham. So it should be an exciting first week.
Good,
And we'll wrap this thing up here with storylines that we'll be following throughout the season. The three ones I want to follow are how will teams adapt in their new classifications? what the Greenbrier West and Princeton have in store for encores. Can Bluefield, Summers, and Independence navigate through difficult schedules into the playoffs and postseason? And did you have any that you're kind of following?
Yeah, I mean, of kind of the intrigue if Beckley can win enough games to get, into a home playoff game. Now that they know they're in the playoffs, I mean, this could be a Beckley team that may surprise some people. Can they win enough games to get in there? And then, of course, the Greenbrier West defense. Can they be as good or effective like they have been over the years for the last couple of years? And really just kind of watching the McDowell County stuff. I'm really interested in both of those teams. I think Riverview's got a shot to make the playoffs, and that would be cool. Of course, Montcalm too, but they're Mercer County. But and Mountain View, I'm just really intrigued. After talking with Coach King like that, you kind of hope they do make the program turn around down there and turn it into. I mean, I'm so old. I remember when Mountain View was extremely good in a lot of sports. So.
They played for a title in the '90s in Class AAA, which is weird to say. 30 years removed from being a AAA school, and now you're in the single A in 4 classes.
And I guess the last thing is just when I was kind of putting all this together, outside of the 2 freshman quarterbacks, but we have a lot of good linemen in this area this year. We have. Maybe 8 or 10 that really could be all-state linemen pretty easily. I think they're going to be all-state linemen. Brady Baker at James Monroe heads the group, but DeAndre Good at Beckley I think is going to be extremely well. I think Beckley's line is going to be really good. I just think that this is going to be a year where linemen may actually kind of like, hey, those guys are effective.
Which is interesting because we give out our awards each year. We do Offensive Lineman of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Offensive Player of the Year, and skill positions too. It's an interesting point you bring up because Brady Baker, you mentioned Brandon Champion, Alex Blankenship, first team All-Stater last year as a sophomore, Jaden Francisco at Bluefield. Princeton has some offensive linemen that they're also very high on that they like a lot.
Yep.
I think that you hit on a really good point there about they call them the big uglies, but the guys that really move things and get things going up front. So I think that we have a lot of good offensive line talent in this area.
I think another thing we need to get back to is, back in the old days, it's when you listen to people talk about certain players, they always had nicknames. We need to get more nicknames out there. The one that's kind of stuck out to me this year was down at Riverview. They have a kid named Landon Stamper, and they call him Cornbread. That's the best so far. I want to see some more, Cornbread. I'm going to see some good nicknames for people from now on.
It's funny, last thing on offensive line, when I was talking to Princeton's head coach Keith Taylor, he told me, he said, this was my thing whenever I was in high school, but I told the lineman, I said, every time we rush for 300 yards, I'll take you to Applebee's for the all-you-can-eat wings. He said when I was in school, Chris Pedigo, who used to coach the program, when he was the offensive line coach or offensive coordinator at that point, he said, there were about 3 or 4 weeks when we burned him up rushing for 300 yards or so. So he said he loved that. He did say he might collude sometimes. He said if they start stringing together 5 or 6 weeks, he said, I might have to collude and we have to throw the ball a little bit more.
Take care of them big boys, I tell you. What was it, Judah always gave you his donuts?
Donuts after 200 yards. So.
Exactly, yeah.
But he never ate any, though. He tracked his calories down.
He's a wrestler, so you got to watch
and that's right. You got to watch every pound.
Yeah.
The last question I'll ask you, I want you to call, and this is I'm kind of dropping this on you, our Offensive Player of the Year and our Defensive Player of the Year, your preseason picks.
Wow. That is a drop because that's the Offensive Player of the Year.
For me, I think I'm going to go with Markel Lowe for Princeton. Rushed for 1,700 yards last year. I think he had about 400 or 500 receiving. I think that they're probably in store for another deep playoff run. And just the way their offense works, I might go Chance Barker usually, but I think that having one good receiver, like last year they had 2 really good receivers in Collins and Mosser, and I think right now who's going to be the B to Mosser, who's going to step up, and it's almost impossible to replace the kind of production that you get from Collins, and I think that Lowe is going to give them a lot. So I like Lowe as our offensive player of the year. It'd be my preseason pick. And defensive player of the year, I like Caleb Kaiser, another Princeton Tiger, defensive end. I thought he really stood out in the Graham game. He had a couple of sacks. he really kind of won the Parkersburg playoff game there for them at the end, the pressure and the strip sack to end the game.
He has some D1 looks too, right?
Yeah, I believe so. They feel pretty confident about what he's done.
Yeah.
That's probably who I would, those would be my preseason picks. But, each year could be different.
I think both those Princeton kids are definitely, going to be at the top. There's no doubt about it. Of course, we talk about Caden Sims. He could have an absolute huge year this year. I think maybe the dark horse may be Richardson over at Oak Hill because, the way they like to throw the ball down the field and, there's going to be some chances for him there. I don't know if he can get as many, many yards as Barker maybe, but I think he's got a shot at it, to throw some big numbers up there. And it's kind of hard to go against, Princeton kid on defensive player of the year because he's an impact player. He does the big things like that. So, as it plays out through the year, I think we're going to have some interesting people on defense, to look at. But I think that's the side maybe is lacking a little more. I think the offenses are going to be pretty dynamic this year. So I think the one thing I've been struck about this too is I think we're going to have a better year overall. It seems like the last couple of years we've had 2 or 3 teams that were just really so good that it was tough to cover at times because the games were hard to watch. I think we're going to have a lot more even games this year, fun games to watch. I think the teams will still be good that we think will be good, but I don't think they're going to go out there and walk on a team 60-7 or something like that.
Absolutely. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
No, I'm ready to roll. I think it's going to be kind of a fun year. I like it when there's some intrigue like this, because, we get to see teams develop and things like that. So I like that. So looking forward to it.
Absolutely. A lot of questions, and we'll be here each week. We'll have new shows that we'll record every Monday and, get them out from there. It'll be previews and recaps, and we'll try to do it as basketball season goes along too. A little bit different,
right.
Obviously games each
one game a week.
Yeah, it makes things easier, but we're hoping to make this a mainstay. And once again, I want to welcome you guys, or thank you guys for joining us today at the Lootpress Sports Lowdown. There'll be our new title going forward, and we'll see you guys next week.